3 years of blood, sweat, and tears went into these workbooks during my math stats degree. And I thought someday it would all be worth it when I finally became a data scientist. Maybe someday weave my way into a FANG or MANG, whatever it's called. Okay, spoiler, it's been about a year since I graduated. And no, I'm not a machine learning engineer or data scientist or data analyst, prompt engineer. I'm none of that. I am literally a bog standard software developer. In terms of what I actually remember from this degree, very, very minimal. Finally awake, let's go for a walk down that way. Now the core of it is it's going to be a lot of heavy reading and hard work if you don't really enjoy numbers. Now it took me about 2 years to realize that I actually just enjoy building things, and statistics just did not satisfy that for me. Now I feel like if I continue rambling, while I don't regret doing this degree, I am not going to paint it in the most amazing light. But it wasn't all bad. A lot of statistics I still found interesting, and I would have loved to have seen some more examples or ideas before I started this degree and thought I would move into data science. So I'm going to head back and pick out some of the things that stand out to me in my notes on my laptop. Go over what it is you actually learn in this degree. Like what is all this? If I'm honest, I was planning on going over just my digital notes and being like, yeah, I don't remember what that is, completely pointless, and that as well. Oh, that is, I don't remember what that is, that's pointless. Oh, that, yeah, I spent like 100 hours on that. I've never used it in my life and probably never will. So I was gonna do that, but I thought, may as well just paint this degree in a slightly better light. There's no harm in not doing so. This is like that book that you keep with yourself on the steps outside the exam venue to regurgitate during the exam. This is kind of cool. Like, it's pretty interesting. So this is like just two different ways of looking at probability, I guess you'd say. Oh, look at my beautiful handwriting. So the top one, frequentist, is to make probability statements referring to variation in sample statistics in hypothetical differential parameter values. Blah, blah, blah. Basically what that's saying is that, okay, I'm probably going to absolutely butcher the terminology here, but say we were to flip a die like 100 times and we assume that the true value of the parameter is of the probability of it getting heads is 50%, okay? And so we've done this sample, we flipped it 100 times, and actually we observed 60 of them were heads and 40 were tails. So now looking at that first approach that I just described, all that gobbledygook words, that's just to say, okay, now we've experienced variation in the actual sample. The sample differed from what we should be seeing if we sampled into infinity. If we took infinitely many samples of 100 flips of this die, we would see that taking the average of all of them, 50% would be heads and 50% would be tails. Okay, so that was the frequentist approach of looking at statistics. But then you have the Bayesian approach, which is to make probability statements about the parameters of, what's the right word? The parameters of a distribution conditioned on fixed values that you see in the sample. So it's like you update your prior belief about something. So you'd start off saying, okay, I assume that this die is unbiased and there's a 50% chance of getting heads. But now looking at the sample data, now I'm going to update my prior belief through the maths, I don't remember. Now I'm going to make probability statements about the parameter. So like the parameter would be like the chance that you get heads. And so we'd say that is the thing that is varying, but the data that we see, that's the truth. Whereas the, what's it called? Frequentist one, the parameter, like the chance of getting heads or tails, that's the truth. But the data that we see is random and experiences variation, all that. So cool, man. That's just changed my whole life. Okay, so these are all the digital notes I made in my 3 years of doing this degree. And I'm not going to go into each of them, but I just know that before I'd started this degree, I would have loved to have seen like just the names of the topics so I could quickly Google the actual stuff that we're learning so I could just prepare myself for like, not actually learning anything, but just what I'd be spending my time doing. Okay, you're getting a little sneak peek here. Elementary probability. CDS and random variables, gamma distributions, Darth Vader. So I don't know why none of my first year courses are here. I may have only made physical notes for those guys. Most of these here you can see at the bottom are STA 2.4F, which was statistical theory and inference, which was the absolute pits. No, it was a good time. It was a good time. It was a lot of work. Initial expectation, Bivariate normal distribution. Beautiful. Look, there's our normal distribution. You see a lot of that guy throughout statistics. In fact, that reminds me, if I had to single out one topic from my whole degree that I thought was the most interesting, it would be what about large numbers? Oh no, central limit theorem. Central limit theorem. If you look at this formula here, like this thing looks completely bizarre. You know, it doesn't look like, this is some maths. It doesn't look like anything that you would expect to see out in nature. It's like, looks like some guy just made it up and now we have to study it because higher education. But what's really cool is that sort of arises out of nature. Like if you take the way this theorem kind of went, was that if you take a sample of from whatever distribution, whatever it is, say it's like the number of people walking through the front door of Pizza Slice on Kloof Street on a Tuesday, okay, and you take the actual distribution of like the time when people going through, how many people per unit time, that's like no one knows what that is. But if we take like every Tuesday and we take the average number of people that came in like over the day, let's say, and we take that average and then we just like sample indefinitely, we just take that average over and over again, taking the sample of all the people on a Tuesday, all the people on a Tuesday, and we get a whole load of averages. Then we get a distribution of all the averages, and you'll see that most of the averages are around this value, and so that's like the average number of people who walk in on a Tuesday is like 34. But that's the average of the averages. But if we look at the distribution of all those averages, I've said average way too much. But look at the distribution of all those averages, that will approach a normal distribution, like this weird ass formula. That's just how nature works. It's just like, yo, would you take the averages of things and you plot that and you take the limit to infinity? Like that's what nature decides to do. Statistics, Shibashev's, Markov, Kolmogorov, a lot of like Eastern European dudes really pulling through for stats gang. There was a lot of linear algebra, which is actually, I mean, I haven't actually used any of it really, but the degree requires that you learn a lot of linear algebra, and that ended up being quite interesting, I suppose. I haven't used it. I can see, obviously, if you go into data science or like ML engineering and stuff, you're definitely going to need to have a really solid understanding. I think like a really solid understanding of linear algebra and just matrix operations and stuff will just make your life a lot easier. So I guess if I did go that route, it would probably help me. This 2005S course, linear models, it was a lot of like experimental design and stuff. So like a lot of it was technically what you would do if you were actually doing experiments in the real world. But obviously, I don't do any of that. Singular value decomposition. I remember spending a lot of time trying to really nail this. Otherwise, the degree actually involved a lot of R. Like I did more coding in this degree than in my actual computer science degree. R was a big thing, and I didn't. Like here's some questions that we'd ask ourselves. What is the probability of observing more than 2 runners cross the finish line in 15 minutes? I don't know what that was about. Gamma and inverse. So here's some proofs that I would like often to screenshot. Tricks in proving things where like you need to just be able to know, have that like trick in your mind that when it appears in the exam and you know you have to prove something, like it's like often there's a little like some sort of creative something. Maths is very creative. That's what I don't think a lot of people give it credit for. Supervised versus unsupervised. So we did do some data sciencey stuff, but it was mainly focusing on like the whole 3 years was building all that mathsy based theory up to the point where you can use existing libraries to actually do the stuff for you. And we strictly used R. Tree-based models, logistic regression, k-fold cross-validation. I remember that. Yeah, so that was like, okay, if we're going to train the data, we want to train our model based on the data, and we split the data up into like 10 segments, and then we decide, okay, the 7th one is going to be our validation set. We'll train the data on the other 9, or however many you want, another 7 and leave 3. And then we look at how well our model predicts the other 30% that we left aside and didn't actually train on. And then, we could overfit. We could be like, our model could end up predicting that other validation set way too accurately. And then what would happen then is, in all likelihood, you wouldn't make good predictions about samples in the future, because you're fitting way too accurately to what you've already seen. Whereas sometimes you want a bit more of a looseness of fit, So less prone to overfitting, really. I guess my doubt that I had before choosing this degree could have been boiled down to just asking myself one question. And that is, do I want to spend my time dealing with numbers, or a bit less dealing with numbers? I mean, inevitably you're doing a university degree, you're going to be dealing with numbers if you're doing something in the science faculty. We're talking science right now. Or do you want to be spending time building things more? Because I felt like a lot of the numbery stuff we were doing in this degree was just so pointless. And this is a lot of pain. This shit never stops coming back to haunt me.